Neighborhood safety, very similar to home safety, but probably with a little bit more of a teamwork attitude. In other words, it's going to promote more of your neighbors getting to know each other. We could probably put together a book on neighborhood safety that would probably be effective and be a pretty long read. However, I'm going to try to break this down into three main components that I see as a neighborhood. Again, this is slightly different than home safety, which we can go a lot more in depth in. I'm going to break this down into three components. I like to look at it as education, I like to look at this as lighting, and I like to look at it as surveillance. Let's talk a little bit about knowledge. Knowledge is a pretty overarching area. Knowledge, I would say, applies to many things in terms of neighborhood watches. Get to know who your neighbors are, get to know what they look like, get to know what their children look like. If a child is lost, you want to know where they can go. A 3 or 4 year old child may not know who mom or dad's last name is or what their address is and where they live. So get to know where these kids actually belong. Get to know what their bicycles look like. If you see a strange bicycle on the side of the road or in the ditch or something of that nature, it might be a good idea to know if there's not a kid attached to it, something could have happened right there to that child. So you might want to know what home to go to actually notify their parents that, hey, I found their bicycle in this ditch or wherever. Get to know what people drive. When you see a car circling very slowly in your neighborhood and they're not delivering pizzas or anything like that, probably worth looking into. That's one thing that I'm very big on is you want to recognize these vehicles that do not belong. And you know what? Don't worry about anybody thinking, oh, are you singling me out? Look, don't worry about hurt feelings. In your neighborhood and in your home, it's better to ask for that forgiveness than to worry about hurting somebody's feelings later on. If you see someone circling a neighborhood, go out and ask them, what are you doing in my neighborhood? You know what? If they have a problem with that, then they can either explain why they're there or they can leave. But guess what? Your family's going to be safer. And you know what? If that was a person seeking to do you or any of your neighbors harm, now they've seen what kind of neighbors live in this neighborhood, and they're going to be a lot less likely to probably challenge you, especially at your home, but in that neighborhood. But also knowledge is get to know your neighbors. Get to know, it's a good idea to know whenever they're going to be on vacation. Speaking of vacation, watch the things that the criminals look out for. Criminals are inherently, or they do inherently stupid things, but criminals are mainly criminals not because they're stupid, because they're lazy. They want an easy way to get things. They're too lazy to work for it. But they're smart enough to know whenever they see garbage cans sitting out in the middle of the street and nobody else's is sitting out except yours, they're thinking that guy's not home. Same goes for newspapers. If one of your neighbors is going out of town and you see 3 or 4 newspapers in their driveway, you know what, even if you don't know they're going out of town, go pick those papers up and put them somewhere where the criminals circling the neighborhoods can't see that. That's always a good idea. Watch out for your neighbors even if you don't know them. But again, it's a good idea if you do know them and they tell you, hey, I'm going out of town for the week. Knowledge is huge in every respect. That brings us to probably the next thing, or the next two, lighting. Criminals don't like to be seen. Criminals are a lot less likely to go to house A that has good lighting than they are to go to house B that has very poor lighting. So it's very important, if you give them a deterrent, they're going to seek that path of least resistance, which isn't going to be your house. And guess what? Since we're talking about neighborhood safety, if the whole neighborhood is lit up, they're probably not going to go to your neighborhood. We don't wish anything on anybody else, but if they're going to rob somebody or they're going to burgle someone's house, I don't want it to be mine. I want it to be somebody else's. And also talking about knowledge of those neighbors brings us to our next thing, surveillance. Okay, surveillance can be looked at in many different ways. I'm going to focus on video surveillance. Video cameras are so easy to set up these days and so easy to monitor. You have ways that you can DVR them to get 24/7 round the clock, 30-day storage of any movement or anything, period. I mean, you can watch grass grow if you want to. There's other security cameras that are motion sensitive and motion activated. Those are great. The only downside to that, if there was a certain car that circled a parking lot and your cameras are far enough away where it doesn't actually get motion activated, there's a very good chance that you're not going to catch that person that you were looking for if you only have a motion activated camera. So sometimes those DVR cameras are good to use in conjunction with those motion sensitive ones. So if you see something on motion sensitive camera or another neighbor does, maybe somebody else in your neighborhood has a particular camera that's actually recording to a DVR device, and you can scrub and go back and through, look at that date and that time to find out when that was. That brings me to my next sub point. Make sure that all your settings on your cameras, your video devices, all that. Make sure that your days, your dates, and your times are set to the right time code, the right date. You know, make sure if it's Central Time, Eastern Time, or whatever, because that's going to assist you when you go back and start looking through all this camera footage to find out when something may have happened. And if your dates and your times are all screwed up, it's going to be nearly impossible to find that if you are looking at a DVR that recorded something on a 24-hour time clock for 30 days. And speaking of cameras, if other neighbors in your neighborhood have cameras, definitely get to know who those people are. You want to know if things happen in certain parts of your neighborhood, where you can go contact those various neighbors and find out if they have footage that maybe you don't. Maybe a better description of a car. Maybe they got a license plate that your camera couldn't pick up. Some neighborhoods actually have neighborhood cameras that actually are monitored by somebody from your homeowners association. Regardless of how you're set up, if your neighborhood is equipped with cameras and they're reliable cameras, I would certainly recommend highly put a sign up. Put a sign up in your neighborhood telling the criminals and the perps that are going into your neighborhood that you're on video. The one thing that criminals don't like, they may not like to be seen. The one thing they hate worse than that is being videotaped. So you let those criminals know that the moment you drove into my neighborhood, I am now videotaping you and you're being captured. So that way, when these guys do something in your neighborhood, it's a lot faster to catch them and even faster to throw them in jail.